Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Standing Guy. This happened 2 months ago. I lived in a 2-room apartment space in a subdivision. The previous owner of the space is a personal friend of mine who was out during one of his business travels. Also, because his lease was up, he was planning to move anyway. During the last month of his contract of the apartment, he let me stay and be caretaker of the space because he still had some important stuff like papers and files. And I was looking for a place to stay in the area because of my new job. Nothing really happened in the first week. The other tenants were nice, and I talked with them when we met on our way out or when I was hanging laundry. I even made a connection with a girl that I liked who lived 2 rooms down, so I felt fine and safe. My friend, by the way, had 3 CCTV cameras installed. My friend is a super paranoid guy because of his job. Each camera pointed in a specific direction. One facing the gate and the recreation area, where tenants would sit and smoke or chill or whatever. Another one was facing the outside door of the apartment rooms, and the last one facing the side of the building, because there is a back door, and my room was on the side of the building too. During breakfasts, I would play some of the footage because there wasn't any TV in the room. One day, I played the footage as I ate my breakfast. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a couple of stray cats and some of the tenants going out the back door during late hours because some of them work graveyard shifts. I skipped forward a bit, and on around 3 a.m., some person came in and stopped. He just suddenly stopped and stood in the middle of the walkway. This woke me up pretty hard as I watched it, as I'm really not a morning person. I skipped forward a bit more to see if he was just drunk or high or someone who might have entered the wrong building, or if he was planning to rob or case the place when he didn't do anything. He just stood there for almost an hour. Then I realized he was standing just outside my room window. My blinds were open at the time because it was hot. Now, note, I was the only person on the side of the apartment who had their blinds open. So this guy was watching me while I slept. I got scared watching this because I was alone at the time. When my friend came back, he was shocked when he saw the footage. I also told the landlord, and they called the police to do some investigating. They never found the guy, and the police said he didn't do anything serious. But still, this incident made me uneasy every time I slept at night. It still does. By the end of the month, my friend's lease was up, and I moved out to another apartment that I share, thankfully, with another friend of mine. This one is more secure, and it has 2 guard dogs. But now, I'm still very paranoid when I sleep in a room with a window in it. The library. I work part-time for my university's IT department. I manage the public computer sites, fix machines when they're broken, handle scheduling with the other consultants, etc. I'm mostly on call all the time, and during a summer weekend, there's not much to do except get paid. The campus library was across the hall from my office, and normally it's open even on weekends, but it was closed for the intersession this weekend before the semester began. The lights were off, the doors were locked. There was no way to get in unless you had swipe card access, which I did. So I was sitting in my office passing time on the internet when I heard a bit of a racket. I peeked out the door and there was this bigger man, probably around 40, tugging on the doors and trying to rip them open. He noticed me come out and asked, more like yelled at me, "When is this place open?" I pointed to the hours sign and had explained it would be open on Monday when classes began. He walked away, but seemed unsatisfied with that answer. More time passed, and out of boredom, I decided I was going to go check out the library. I'd only been there once before while it was closed, so I swiped my card and went in. It was a really creepy place when it was closed. I wasn't supposed to be there, and if I got caught, I probably would have been in a small amount of trouble since I really didn't have permission or a reason for being in another department's area during closed hours. All the lights were off, with the only light coming in through the windows. I mean, the place is huge, and you could hear ventilation fans clicking on and off. As I crept past the rows and aisles, the locked doors' study cubicles creaked and made noises occasionally, as if someone were inside them. And that's often true. People were known to hide in there after library closing hours to study in a quiet setting or have sex. Yeah, gross. But the library had been closed for almost 24 hours at that point, and there was likely no one camped out in there. It was just noises. But still, as I walked alone in the place, it felt like I was not alone. I went to the lounge area and sat down, but I felt uncomfortable there in the dark silence. So I walked to the bathroom, and as I walked in, I noticed that there was someone in a stall. All I could see was one foot at first glance from underneath the door. One naked foot. No shoes or socks. In a public restroom. One naked, bloody foot. There was a small pool of blood on the floor in the stall and small trickles of blood on the foot. I froze for a small moment and then tightened up. I was startled at first because I hadn't expected to find anyone else there. Second, a fucking bloody foot. I didn't see any sort of socks or shoes around. No pants around ankles, nothing like that. I didn't even see a second foot. Just that lone, pale, cold, white, large foot. The stall door was partially open, but not enough that I could see inside from my angle. So I said with a shaking voice, "Hello?" No response. Nothing happened. I started to wonder if there was even a body attached to the foot. I wonder if there's a dead body inside. I wondered if it was some kid killing himself in there. So finally I asked, "What the fuck are you doing, man?" Then the toes slowly curled up, flexed, and then relaxed. I promptly turned right out the door and walked out of the library quickly. I got back to my office and tried to make sense of what I had just seen. Should I call the campus police? I really just didn't want to get involved with dealing with any of the paperwork and the questions with the police. I justified that I wasn't supposed to be over there anyway, and would have had to have lied about some reason why I was. I called my friend Andy instead. I just wanted to talk to someone about what I had seen. Honestly, I felt queasy. Andy and I talked for a good 40 minutes. Most of the conversation just like, "Shit, dude, that's messed up." And no startling discoveries. I was still heavily considering calling the police, but so much time had passed that I assumed whoever was in there would have been long gone. The bloody foot also certainly thought he was alone, so he would have been startled by my appearance too. But after a while, I decided I was going to go back and stay on the phone with Andy. Now, I knew how stupid that was. If someone was hurting themselves, they might not care if they hurt me either. They were probably very unstable, and they had some sort of knife or blade. I was not in any mood to get into a knife fight during my shift, but for some reason I just wanted to check the bathroom again. As I walked through the library, it was worse this time, because now I knew I was not alone. There was somebody else there, possibly with a weapon, but it was still dark and silent. I softly walked to the bathroom and listened outside the door for a moment. I didn't hear any sounds, but I did get the chills. Andy was on speakerphone but was remaining silent. So I slowly pushed the door open, and the foot was still there. There was more blood than before, but the foot was still cold and pale-looking, and the door to the stall was now completely shut. It was the only other thing that changed in the last 40 minutes. I was really hoping not to see anyone in there this time. I didn't want to anger a possibly suicidal person. But I timidly asked, "Are you all right?" No response. No motion. Only blood, and I was starting to feel sick. So I repeated, "Are you okay in there? Do you need me to call for help?" Slowly, the foot turned and pointed towards me. A second foot came down alongside it, also with blood smeared all over it. Whoever was inside the stall was now standing and facing directly at me, with just that stall wall between us. I couldn't see the top of a head. My heart was racing, and finally a deep voice responded, "I am fine." That was a good enough answer for me. I promptly turned and left. This time I ran. I told myself before going in there that if he was still there, I would definitely call the police. But I still didn't. I mean, the guy said he was fine. I wanted to put this out of my head and just forget it. The voice sounded like an older man, maybe between 30 and 50. The size of the feet made him seem really big, but not tall. It's kind of hard to say. I locked the door to my office and did nothing for the last 30 minutes or so of my shift. But when I stepped out into the hallway, there were bloody footprints walking out of the library and over to my office door, with plenty of them outside my office door. Whoever had been out there had been pacing and standing there for a while. Small drips of blood led away from my door and stopped after a small distance. I was horrified. I hurried over to my truck, and I paused for a moment and realized with the amount of blood outside my office door and in that hallway, I really couldn't just leave. I knew I would be asked about it at least. So I knew I had to call it in, and I headed back. All of the footprints were mostly gone. All the fucking bloody footprints and drops had been wiped away. There were small smears here and there. It wasn't a perfect cleaning job. But I would have only been gone at my truck for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Whoever it was still there, hanging around and watching me. I was very frightened now, so I went right back to my truck. But there were bloody towels on my door handle, on the ground, on the hood of my truck. That person was seriously fucking with me, so I hurried right over to the campus police. I was just going to tell them the whole story, even the fact that I had been trespassing, and that I went back for a second visit instead of calling them first. And I did. I told them everything. They took pictures of my truck and told me that they were going to look into everything. They returned to the library, but requested that I did not accompany them back inside. They told me to go home. That was all 2 days ago. I haven't heard anything since. I have to go to work again tonight, and it's another closing shift. Who was outside? About 10 years ago, when I was 15, I house sat for a family a block over when they went on long vacations. Since I didn't have a car back then, I just slept at their place to take care of their dog and ducks and rabbits. That took away a lot of the back and forth overnights. They let me sleep in their master bedroom when the dog slept in there with me. One night I was dead asleep and woke up to howling. The dog was barking and howling at the window at 1 a.m. He barks a lot, but not like that. This was a stranger alert type bark that anyone who owns dogs will recognize. I jumped out of bed and looked at the window. The porch light was on, but that was it, and I could barely see the front end of a white car parked just out of view of the house. It was just parallel parked there. No lights, and I didn't see anybody. So I was about to tell the dog to shut up and go back to sleep. when I saw the unmistakable shadow of a man approaching the house. And a few seconds later, there was pounding on the door. For reference, I'm a female, and as a 15-year-old teenage girl, I was not about to answer the door to some unknown stranger at 1 a.m, especially in a house that wasn't mine. The person was knocking over and over and over. The dog was barking louder, and I was freaking out, so I grabbed my cell and called 911. The first mistake, using my cell and not a landline. The operator said, "What's your location?" And I realized I didn't know the woman's address that I was at. I was fumbling around like an idiot, terrified with things like, "Oh, it's on Main Street. I don't know the number. I live at 123 My Street, and this place is a block away," etc. I've only ever known this house as that place a block away. I never needed to know the address. All the while, the pounding was getting worse and worse, like the door was about to be kicked in. The person wasn't yelling or talking, just knocking. I was huddled against a wall while the 911 operator tried to calm me down and said someone will be there soon. The knocking stopped, and then there was a flashlight shining into the bedroom window. I was hiding on the floor, and the light didn't hit me, and then whoever it was resumed banging on the door instead, all while the dog was losing his mind. I would have set him out toward the front door, but he was just a little cocker spaniel, and I don't think he could do much other than yap. Then the knocking stopped again, and there was silence. I told the operator, "He stopped, but I don't know where he is now." They asked me, was he trying to break in a window? Was he sneaking around the back? Did he leave? The operator said, "I'm transferring you to an officer in your area now, okay?" And then clicked over. A man who sounded pissed as all hell was on the line. Without saying a name or badge number, he said, "Hey, that was me at your door. Why didn't you answer?" I don't remember the conversation verbatim. It's been too long. But essentially, he was coming to this woman's house in the middle of the night to arrest her adult son whose last known location was this place. He was angry at me for not answering the door. The flashlight into the bedroom was, according to him, a signal to answer. The white car parked just off to the side of the house was his patrol car. Yeah, a cop. The whole time, it was a cop. He never announced himself as police or anything. He just banged on the door, expecting a response. I kept explaining that I was just house-sitting, that I didn't know her son or where he was. I offered to give him the owner's phone number, but he just said no, and then hung up. No name, no badge number, nothing. I never even saw his face because he drove away, and he'd come alone as well. The official story was he was knocking with a warrant, but even a 15-year-old me knew that was bullshit. My only guess is that he was hoping to surprise this guy unaware, and that they had some kind of personal grudge or history. The homeowner did admit to me that they had had some financial problems and owed money to people, and that they had been bouncing checks. So, my guess? The cop was doing an unofficial visit. But when I called 911, he must have heard what was going on his radio and backed off with some other excuse. So yeah, that fucked me up pretty good, and I didn't sleep in that house ever again. At the time, I was annoyed that no police ever came in to check up on me. Looking back, I realized how sketchy the whole situation was, and it's probably better that I never saw the guy's face. So, to the unknown policeman trying to break down the door, let's not meet again. The Total Creep. Location: Bayshore, New York. I was around 18 or 20 years old. This guy was always going into my friend's job, pretending to be a massage therapist. He had fake cards made up and would give them to my friend, who was about 16, but looked much younger. This guy was always trying to get him into his car to go back to his house for a massage. The guy was very creepy and used a fake name, Bob Kohler. One night, a bunch of friends were hanging out, and I suggested that we prank call the guy. So I got on the phone making a babyish voice saying that I was 7 and found his name on a bathroom wall. He was instantly interested and used creepy phrases like, "How do I know you're legit? And what do you want me to do to you?" I suggested that I leave my house, and I told him that my parents were asleep and I'd meet him in a park nearby. He hung up, and we piled into the car and then drove past the park. Sure enough, we found the guy sitting in his car across the street waiting for the little boy that didn't exist. After about a half an hour, he left, and we followed him back to his house. It looked straight out of a nightmare. The neighborhood was nice, but his house was covered with trees so thick you couldn't even see the front door. We did a reverse search on his address and got his real name. We also found out he was a confirmed child molester. We called the cops, but they said they couldn't do anything because, quote, he didn't actually molest a 7-year-old at the park. Well, we let it be for about 5 years, and then one night we happened to drive past the house. Someone had boarded it up, and most of the trees had been cut down. We asked a passerby about the man who lived there, and he just said the guy was a creep, and he was a child molester, and that he had died alone and left no family. So, to our teenage selves, our next logical step? We broke into the house. We went near the steps in the backyard and found hidden steps down. The door was locked from the outside, but we had no problem breaking it and went in. The basement had old photo developing equipment, or so my friend said it was, but nothing else was in there. We made our way upstairs and noticed that the lock was on the outside of the basement door. We continued our exploration through the house, and we came to a hallway. It was long and had about 8 doors, all with locks on the outside. In each closet, scattered around, had toys like army men and dress-up jewelry on the floors. We went up to the attic, and again, the lock was on the outside. We went in, and the wood plank floor looked new. However, it didn't meet flush with the wall. We reached under some floorboards that were loose, and we started pulling out toys, children's clothing, and animal bones. It felt like we were all going to puke, so we left and never looked back. 10 years later, other people moved into that house, but that place still haunts my dreams. Disturbed roommate. This story benefits from a little bit of background. So let's start with my freshman year of college. I met Emily via my freshman orientation group. We were both theater majors and eager to make friends and feel less awkward and alienated in the overwhelming flurry of early university life. We got on quite well. She was maternal and gentle and sweet, always going out of her way to make sure everyone was doing all right and felt included. We spent the first few weeks of that year hanging out in my dorm room, watching cartoons and YouTube videos, and just talking. We had a ton of common interests, and I was really happy that I'd met her. However, as freshman year went on, Emily's sweet demeanor started cracking. Emily and her roommate Beth lived across the hall from me, so I got to be close with Beth as well. Beth would confide in me about the weird and upsetting things Emily did. She would randomly start sobbing and then scream at Beth whenever she asked if she was okay, and she would belittle Beth in front of other people. One week, we had 2 fire drills in a row because a girl in our hall's hair straightener set off the alarm. Emily started loudly screaming about how this girl's straightener should be taken away from her, and how she was an awful conceited bitch, right outside of said girl's door. Beth told Emily to calm down, and this offended Emily so much that when Beth got back from class that afternoon, Emily had constructed a cardboard partition between her half of the room and Beth's. This behavior culminated with me and my freshman year roommate standing outside of Emily's door one night, having to talk her out of slitting her wrists. We should have called the cops that night. It would have saved us years of trouble. After that suicide threat, though, Emily started to shape up. Me, Emily, Beth, and my freshman year roommate Kitty decided to all live together in a suite the next year, since we all got along so well. Half more of a year went quite smoothly. Junior year, this year, the 4 of us were going to live in a house together. However, a month before we were to move in, Kitty sent us a text message saying she couldn't live in the house for financial reasons. It smelled fishy, but what could we do? We got another roommate, Roxy, who was going to share a room with Emily since the house only had 3 bedrooms, and Beth and I had already claimed the singles. Emily started causing problems as soon as we'd all moved in. She was ridiculously anal about cleaning, literally screaming at us and throwing things if we left a grain of rice in the sink or an empty coffee cup on the counter. She'd rearrange the fridge at 3 in the morning and in the process throw out a lot of my food. I confronted her about it when I realized most of my groceries were missing, and she just said, "Oh, I thought those were mine and they'd gone bad." She then proceeded to give me an absurd amount of money to replace the groceries, far more than I would need. Then she constructed a 30-item chore chart for us, telling us to do everything on it every day. This behavior, coupled with her penchant for coming home angry from her job and screaming and throwing things around, regardless of whether we had guests over, drove Roxy, Beth, and I to the point of insanity. We confronted her about it, which culminated in a big fit of angry screaming and tears on her part. She got in my face and screamed at me for an hour, but eventually we decided we would try hard to keep the house cleaner for her, and she would be less threatening and abrasive all the time. We had about a week of happy, family-like living before shit really hit the fan. One Saturday in mid-October, we spent the afternoon decorating our house for Halloween. It was great. Emily had to go to work, but said she would be back at 11 and we could all watch a movie together. I happened to be in charge of the artists for a play at the time, so I had a ton of painting to do. I spent the rest of the day painting and was still working in the theater at 4 in the morning when Beth, haggard and clad in pajamas, showed up. Worried, I asked what was going on, and she simply said I needed to go home right then. Something was up with Emily. As we walked back to the house, she explained the situation. Emily had staggered through the front door at 3:50 a.m. She stumbled up to the room she shared with Roxy, where her banging into the walls managed to wake Roxy up. Emily began screaming and tearing off all of her clothes, yelling variants of, "I want to kill myself," "I want to die," and "Someone kill me." Naked Emily got onto her bed, still screaming and crying about wanting to die, and began spanking herself. The spanking went on for about 15 minutes while Roxy laid there in the dark, horrified. Finally, Emily collapsed, moaning and sobbing. Her moans eventually subsided and she passed the fuck out, completely unresponsive. Roxy gathered up her blanket and pillow, ready to sleep downstairs for the night, when she met Beth in the hallway. She explained to Beth what had happened. The 2 of them tried to wake Emily up, shaking her, turning the lights on and off, and calling her name, but she was totally unconscious. They were worried, and that's when they came to get me. I was worried too, given Emily's history of suicide attempts, and the fact that she said she'd be home at 11 to hang out, but instead stumbled home at 3:50. When they went downstairs, they saw that Emily had pulled up the Game of Thrones DVD menu to the words, "Winter is coming." As goofy as it sounds, we wondered if it was a suicide note of some sort. Emily would do that kind of thing. There were small pieces of paper and pairs of scissors all over the floor. I tried to rouse Emily when Beth and I got back to the house, but she was out. She was breathing faintly, but her body was cold to the touch. We called an ambulance just to get things checked out. We were afraid Emily had tried to overdose or she had mixed something else with alcohol and reacted badly to it. She had mixed things before once and spent the night throwing up all over herself. We tried to dress Emily before the paramedics arrived, but gave up due to her being dead weight. However, in the process of trying to sit her up so we could get some clothes on her, we noticed that her ass was covered in oozing red welts from how hard she had been spanking herself. She woke up while the paramedics were examining her and drunkenly explained to them while she had a history of depression, no, she'd never kill herself. The paramedics told us that we were good friends for having them come over to check her out. They said she was just hammered and needed some time to sober up. They offered to take her to the mental hospital to be on suicide watch for the night, but we said that we would watch her. We were just so relieved that she was only drunk. Another decision we would come to regret. We were sitting in the living room after the medics left when Emily stomped down the stairs, face twisted in an inhuman expression of horror. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" she screamed. She was zipping a black jacket over just a bra. She proceeded to scream at us for 2 hours while we tried to explain our rationale. Roxy explained to Emily how she'd been spanking herself and screaming that she wanted to kill herself. "I do want to kill myself," Emily replied. "There isn't a second of the day that goes by that I don't want to die." Roxy and I, having both dealt with severe depression for most of our lives, tried to explain to Emily that she should get some help. There was no reason to keep being miserable all the time when antidepressants and therapy were options. In response to that, Emily crawled across the floor on all fours and wrapped both arms around one of my legs. I was sitting in a chair and she was on the floor, both arms wrapped around the joint of my knee, squeezing so hard that it left bruises. She was then digging her fingers into my flesh, and she delivered a rehearsed-sounding monologue about how over the summer she had stood by a highway, willing herself to jump in front of an oncoming 18-wheeler. Then she concluded with a bitter laugh. "I guess I just didn't want to ruin the driver's night." She started trying to provoke all of us into anger, telling us how if we were passed out and unresponsive, that she would have been a good friend and not called the medics for us. She proceeded to tell us how we were all monsters and how waking up to a medical examination was like being raped. I got very angry about that, and I excused myself to my room, afraid I would react violently if I stayed down there any longer. Emily came into my room about an hour later. When I got up and went to her, she grabbed me by the neck and started kissing me on the mouth, around my face, her breath reeking of vodka. She squeezed the flesh on the nape of my neck, digging her fingernails into it, and began telling me how she had resented me ever since freshman year. She hated that I was pretty, likable, and talented, and that I wasn't constantly miserable like her. She said she hated me since the day she met me, and just poured abuse on me while she continued to hold me and try to kiss me against my will. I managed to push her away finally, and she told me she was going to move out, which I said was a good idea. She finally left my room and went down to the living room where, despite my being upstairs in my room with the door closed, I could hear her simultaneously sobbing and cackling. It was a ragged, pained crying, and it would turn into a wicked, witch-like laughter. And then she began spanking herself again so loudly, I could hear it like it was happening right outside my door. Now, I never heard this part though. She also trashed the living room, punching and breaking our window blinds and throwing paper and furniture all over. The icing on the cake, though, was that she took a 10-inch serrated carving knife and cut deep, crooked gashes all over her arms and legs. She then stuck the knife, still covered in her blood, in the dishwasher with the rest of our dirty dishes. Roxy, Beth, and I consulted our landlord the next day. It took Emily about a week to get moved out, but in the meantime we also went to the police, got a restraining order against her, and spent a few days living in protective housing in an unfurnished basement. We're back in the house now, sans Emily, and we've had the locks changed. We haven't interacted with her since, and I hope I never have to again. A few weeks ago, she tried to run Roxy over in a crosswalk, but Roxy fortunately escaped. We reported that to the police, but not much happened. It was a pretty horrifying experience and definitely left us all pretty traumatized. I really hope Emily gets help, but, well, I'm not going to be the one that gets it for her. Who was there? One late afternoon, a handful of years ago, a friend of mine invited me over to her place downtown for a get-together, so we planned to get to her place at the same time. If I got there early, her roommate would let me in, and it turned out I did get there early. I had met her roommate once before, so it wasn't going to be too awkward while it was just the two of us. The roommate let me in and then started going into how she was getting super creeped out. She'd actually left the place for a bit and happened to be home as I pulled up. I asked her what she was talking about, and she said, "You know the attic upstairs? Well, there's a railing at the very top where the stairs end. I had to move some stuff out of my room and take it upstairs, so I threw some things into a big box to make one trip. Well, the box was really heavy, and I'm by myself, so I was just taking breaks getting it up there." Her room was downstairs on the first floor, and she had 2 flights to go up. But she said when she got to the attic, well, I set the box down to take a quick break, and I looked up, and I swear to God, I saw someone pull their face away from that railing, right as we made eye contact, like someone was looking at me, and then tried to hide as I glanced up at the stairs. She said this all with fear in her eyes. I cut her off right there and said that we should probably go outside because that didn't sit too well with me, what with a stranger being in the house. But she continued to say no. She called out upstairs and no one answered. And then, like an idiot, she walked up there and looked around. She called down and said she didn't find any real signs of entry or anything, but their place is literally about half a foot away from another building, and their windows in the attic level line up with the windows to the house next door. There had been some complaints about homeless people squatting at the other home because it was vacant. She only thought of that once I got there. At that point, I wasn't sure if we were convinced it was a homeless person or maybe she was just seeing things. And then my friend showed up from work, and we gave her the lowdown. She was obviously a little shaken up about it too, but we all looked around the place and decided that there wasn't any real threat, especially since I'm super skeptical about things, which probably often gets me into trouble. I was bent on telling everyone that her roommate was seeing things and that we were fine. And at the end of the night, I was on my friend's computer in a room showing her some pictures from a vacation I had just taken with some friends. Then we heard something upstairs in the attic, like a thud. My friend called out to her roommate, and her roommate answered from downstairs and started to walk upstairs to the bedroom. We told her we thought we had heard something upstairs, and we waited in silence. Again, a thud, like someone had bumped into something. I mean, it's hard to put into words what I actually thought. I didn't take it as a threat or feel any real danger, but I was convinced it was something else, like maybe the house is old, or even if something really was going on, there was 3 of us and 1 of them. Well, looking back as I typed this, that was all probably a defense mechanism, because I really was afraid it would actually be something. The 3 of us have never had to face anything like that, and we were trying to decide what to do. Should we call the police? Should we wait and see what was going on, or should we have just run outside? I said that I would take a closer look. I wasn't going to go upstairs, but I was going to walk upstairs to the door and try to listen for something else. Right then, we all heard the same thing. That 3rd floor door opened, and someone started to walk down the stairs. Then they stopped. And I'm not making this up, this is what I heard. In an instant, we ran to the door and slammed it shut. The house is older, so there aren't any locks on the bedroom doors. Just the bathroom and the front and back doors have locks. I was completely freaking out at that point. Even if we did outnumber whoever just walked downstairs, the amount of pressure I'd put on the doorknob and the door itself was at some superhero level. I felt like I was going to faint for how scared I was. And then it was quiet for a moment, and the doorknob began to turn, and I could feel some pressure from the door pushing on me. Someone trying to get in. It got quiet again, and then suddenly the door shot back. The amount of force almost knocked me off balance. And right then, the door was banging against my shoulder. The person was trying to force their way in by throwing their body at the door. As you can imagine, there was lots of screaming on our end, and I couldn't tell you if this person was yelling anything, but this was just one historic moment in my memory. Even as such, it is kind of hazy after the years, but I knew at that point I was not allowing that door to open. It continued to jump open a few inches and then slam back shut. And then, as quickly as things had begun, everything stopped. We heard footsteps run back upstairs, and that was it. It was over. I held the door shut as one of my friends called the police, and after what seemed like an eternity, the police arrived at the place, and I still kept my shoulder pressed on that door just in case. My friend opened the bedroom door and raced downstairs to greet the officers, and I again kept the door shut. They made their way upstairs, and we showed them around. And they did check out the attic, but didn't find anything. They, however, did mention the possibility of someone coming in through a window from the house next door. They too knew of the homeless people squatting there, but they checked around the property next door and didn't find anything. My friends and I left the house that night, and they broke their lease immediately and moved someplace else. Burglar pervert. I was 11 or 12 years old and had just arrived at home after a day at school. As per usual, I dumped my book bag on the floor next to the door and went straight to use the toilet. I finished up as normal and then went to the computer, looking forward to playing around on Neopets.com like the average kid of my age. I flicked on the computer screen and my heart jumped into my throat. My desktop wallpaper had been changed to an image of a female's leg, naked except for black lace-up heels, and she was covered in blood. There were hundreds of images saved to the desktop of gore and extreme BDSM scenes. I didn't know if there was still someone in the house with me, and I bolted out the door and called the police and my parents. According to the police, when they searched my computer history, someone had broken into our house just minutes after we had all left for the day. Whoever it was spent all day looking at porn and gore images up until when I came home. They had still been in the house while I was peeing and must have used that moment to bail. They were never caught, but needless to say, we moved out soon after that. The Creeper in the Woods. For some background, I am an 18-year-old male, and this encounter occurred when I was around 13. Every year when the 4th of July rolls around, me and my family would go to a friend's house to celebrate. The friend and his family were quite wealthy, and they lived in a large house about a half a mile into the woods. The 4th of July parties at their house were always huge events, with around 15 to 20 families attending. The younger people at the parties were either around my age or high school age. I typically hung out with my friend Gavin and his sister Trina, who I had a huge crush on at the time. They were the kids of the family friend that owned the house. On this particular 4th of July, the older kids decided they wanted to go out into the woods. And of course, all the younger kids wanted to go too, me included. Keith, one of the older kids, agreed to us tagging along under the condition that we wouldn't chicken out and run away. All of the younger kids agreed, and the whole group journeyed into the woods. Keith was leading us down a trail to a nearby pond when Trina grabbed my hand. 13-year-old me turned beet red in the darkness, but I could also tell that something was wrong. She whispered, "There's someone in the woods. I just saw him. He's a big man." She pointed out into the trees, but I didn't see anything. I squeezed her hand tightly and told her that she was just seeing things. Trina had always been the sort to scare easily, and I thought nothing of it. We finally made it to the pond and only had one flashlight with us, but by this time everyone's eyes had adjusted to the blackness of the woods. We all sat around talking and goofing off, and we occasionally heard sounds out in the woods, but we just figured it was the local deer population. Most of us were children of deer hunters, and the area was near our dad's hunting land. Eventually, everyone settled down, and Keith started telling us a scary story. It was something about kids getting lost in the woods. Yeah, nice one, Keith. As he went on with the story, Trina's grip on my hand got tighter and tighter. She was practically shaking when one of Keith's friends tossed a log into the pond right at the story's climax. Everyone jumped and screamed, and eventually we all started laughing at how scared we got. But suddenly, another distinct laugh joined ours. It was a deep, throaty chuckle that echoed off the empty space around the pond. We all stopped laughing and sat in silence. I looked around and my eyes locked onto a large black mass that could only be a human standing at the edge of the woods around the pond. "That was a good one. The ending startled me," said the mass. The voice sounded similar to the chuckle we had heard before. The air seemed to freeze, and for what seemed like an eternity, no one moved. It felt like Trina was trying to shatter the bones in my hand. Then suddenly, as if time had started again, we all scrambled up and ran. We ran as fast and as hard as we could, but it didn't seem fast enough. I could hear the heavy footfalls behind our group, heavier than any of us could have ever produced. The man was following us, and after what seemed like hours, we all exited the woods and ran into the brightly lit driveway of my friend's house. We watched the edge of the woods while Keith did a head count, and Trina, to this day, swears that she saw the man standing at the edge of the woods, watching us before turning back and walking away. This remains one of the scariest experiences of my life. I like to tell myself that the man was just passing by and had no ill intentions. But then why did he chase after us? If he was the one who Trina saw on the way to the pond, why did he follow us there? I'll never know his intentions or why he was there at all. Freak at the Head Shop. I used to live in Brooklyn, New York, and had a job at a head shop. I was about 19 and fairly naive. I'd been in an abusive relationship for a number of years and had terrible self-esteem. That being said, I enjoyed our customers. They were usually really chill and had some pretty great stories. I closed the shop most nights and always worked alone since we were just a tiny business with 5 employees total. One night, a guy came in about 10 minutes until close looking for a new pipe, and I helped him out, as you do. He paid, thanked me, but didn't leave. I was trying to get my shit done so I could leave, but of course I couldn't count the drawer or anything until he was out of there. He was just standing in the corner near the door, staring at me. This went on for a couple of minutes before I asked him if I could do anything else for him. His response really creeped me out. Who could cut my face? I'd like that. I was noping so hard. I told him he had to get out before I called the cops. He pulled out a tiny pocket knife and laid it on the counter, begging me to at least prick the skin of his arm. My boss had installed a silent alarm underneath the counter the last time the shop was robbed, and I was pressing that thing like my life depended on it. Actually, it probably did. The guy was becoming more and more agitated, yelling at me that I was a bitch just like all the other girls. He said we were all whores who'd fuck anyone who wasn't him, and that if I knew what was good for me, I'd cut him. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. The cops got there in about 5 minutes, and the guy was arrested for aggravated harassment. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. Hotel security guard. When I was about 16, I went on a trip to Cabo San Lucas with my family and my best friend. My friend and I had a hotel room to ourselves for the trip, and something I was naturally excited about. One afternoon, I was getting on the elevator and a security guard was hanging out with me. As the elevator rose, he looked at me and said, "Excuse me, were you wearing a green skirt on the beach the other day?" I replied, "Yeah, why?" I was already reflexively creeped out at the mention of the miniskirt I had worn a few days prior. He just said, "Oh, nothing, I really liked it a lot." When I got off the elevator, he got off on the same floor and was walking past as I took out my key card to unlock the door to my room. At 4 a.m. that morning, I woke up with a start, only to register that there was a man standing silently at the foot of my bed. A man in a security guard uniform, the one from the elevator. As he saw me wake up, he stammered something about my door not being locked properly, and then he ran out of the room. I was still groggy with sleep and couldn't fully register what had just happened. And a moment after he ran out, I became aware I was lying on my back with the covers around my ankles. I sleep nude, but I never kick my covers off in my sleep, as I'm always cold and the AC in our room was on full blast. I'm also a very deep sleeper, so someone standing at the foot of my bed alone would never stir me. I'm pretty sure him pulling the covers back caused me to get cold, and that's what woke me up. I'm scared to think what could have happened had my friend not been fast asleep in the next bed. Unfortunately, as I had been creeped out in the elevator and had avoided making eye contact or looking at his face, and as it was so dark, I couldn't have identified him in the room. I never bothered to report it to the hotel, and I still regret that years later. Workplace danger. This happened in the winter of December 2011. They say the scariest of scary stories are those that involve real people, not the paranormal. And after this, I have to say I agree. Here's a recollection of the most terrifying experience of my life. My husband was sleeping his way back to good health in the hospital after a nasty infection. The man never went to the doctor, and I practically had to force him to go to the hospital when his fever hit 105. I was worried, but they admitted him and he stayed for a week. The day before he was supposed to be sent home was a Sunday, and while my workplace was closed, I had to catch up on some year-end reports. It wasn't unusual for me to go in on days that we were closed. My coworker Lolo would be there, which meant that I could bring in my daughter. Lolo didn't have kids, though she had tried for many years before her husband passed away. She was there on this particular Sunday to work on the company newsletter, and as it was a rather simple project, she often asked to play with my daughter, Via, when I brought her in. The day started off normal. As I crunched numbers and prepared my reports, Lolo and Via sat on the other side of the office room coloring, and it made me happy to watch them. Lolo got so much enjoyment from being around a child, and Via loved the attention. It was win-win. When she asked if she could take my little lady for a walk around the dealership, I said sure. What could that hurt? We were the only ones in the building, and Via loved to look at all the cars. But then a half hour passed, and I thought it was odd that they had been gone so long. So I took a peek out of the cashier's window to see if they were in the waiting room. They weren't. But as I turned to go back to my desk, I noticed Lolo's shoes. She looked like she was lying face down, still in the hallway. My heart raced and I ran out to see what happened. Via was nowhere in sight. I immediately flipped my phone open and dialed 911 and then ran down the hall to the service area to try to find my daughter. I hardly responded to the operator. I was frantic. The operator said they would send someone and told me to stay put, but I couldn't. My daughter was gone. Lolo had been knocked out. Something was very wrong with this picture, and by the time that they got there, it could have been worse. So I dropped the phone when I heard a tiny, tiny scream in the distance. It was coming from the parts department, an area of the building that remains locked when the business is closed. The only way in there was with a key, so whoever had Via was a coworker. I ran to the door and shoved it, and it was locked. And then I saw Via standing in an aisle with a tall figure behind her, and when she saw me, she tried to run to the door, but the guy grabbed her and ran to the back of the room out of sight. I was about to lose it when I saw the propane tank nestled behind a display to my right. I grabbed it and then threw it through the glass. It shattered and I unlocked the door and raced in. I heard Via's cries coming from the upstairs stockroom and headed up the stairs as fast as I could go. And as I ran, I heard the door bursting in downstairs. The police were there. I yelled to give them my location, then rounded the corner in the stockroom, peering down the aisles, trying to find my daughter. Aisle 1, nothing in sight. Aisle 2, same thing. But what I saw in aisle 3 chilled me to the bone. The owner's son, a known garbage can style addict who used to be a salesman, had my daughter at the end of the aisle. He was tying her up with electrical wire, and she tried to run to me and fell. He tried to run back down the stairs, but as he hit the middle of the steps, he was blocked by the police officers. Thank God, Via was fine physically. We've been taking her to a child therapist to work through the trauma, and I'm just glad she's too young for this to really form into a memory. As for the crazy man who took her, he had been living upstairs. Apparently, no one had taken his key when he was fired 6 months previous. He never provided an explanation, and the owner of the dealership paid a large amount of money to keep it out of the news. As for Lolo, she recovered too, but she never came back to work, though she did remain in touch with me. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. Another fine walk through the vault. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to UncleJoshTrueScaryStories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're listening to this on YouTube and you like what you've heard, please give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, hey, why not? And while you're at it, maybe even tell a friend. I'd really appreciate it. Follow me on social media, and if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing a step further, find a link to my Patreon page in the description and consider purchasing some Campfire Crew and Uncle Josh merchandise. A link to my storefront at tpublic.com is down there as well. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything: a ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.